And also talked about very interesting and some bold claims in there. The book we are reviewing now, that is the 21 Lessons for the 21st Century.
The welcome colleagues. I think this was or has been the idea behind Senior Common Room, which we have lost as an institution. And I'm happy this is coming back to that initial idea of how a Senior Common Room should function. As has been said, my name is Kofi Asare, and I first stepped onto the campus of UCC in October 1972, and got lost on my first day in the science faculty building. And since then, I've been pointing around. I left as a student in 75, did my national service in 75, 76, and then left Cape Coast for a while and came back as a lecturer on the 1st of April, 1980. So 1st of April this year will be my 39th year as a lecturer at the University of Cape Coast. I started as a geographer. Now I don't know how to describe myself, but I would say I'm a demographer and a social scientist. So that's, I don't know, whatever. I think things can come up as we go along. Thank you very much.
Those who've been in his philosophy class will also know that he's a great philosopher.
My name is Kofi Ananifening. I'm at the physics department. I started teaching in 1979. I have one wife now. Janet teaches at IUPA. I have 4 kids. They are grown-ups. My interest is atmospheric physics, soil physics, and nanoscience. That is what I can say about myself.
Thank you. Yes, so my name is Levi Afetu. I'm with the Department of Molecular Biology and Biotechnology. I'll describe myself as a mycologist or fungal biologist. And my research interests include application of fungi to solving environmental issues. Yes, I joined the university in 2012, and I'm still here. Yeah, thank you.
I think I have a mic. Good evening. I'm YUVAL and I'm a historian, African historian. I pay attention to social and cultural issues affecting African, people on the continent of Africa and those in the diaspora. I think we talked about worldviews, right? And you asked me to talk about our worldviews. I'm a historian.
My name is Kofi Apia. I am a Catholic priest. Joined the university in 2011. I'm a philosopher and a theologian. My area of specialization is ethics. I'm happy to be here.
One of the things that emboldened me, or that showed that I was really on the right track, was the fact that even in their circles, Vatican actually is looking for responses to some of the things that Harari writes. So we're dealing with one of the best books you can ever read. So there are a lot of themes that we will go through, but let's pick with the first theme of the post-work era. So Harari writes and says that no remaining human job will ever be safe from the threat of future automation, and goes on to talk about the fact that having automation And AI, when we say AI, we mean artificial intelligence and other things coming into play. Jobs like accountants, probably lecturers, doctors, lawyers. All these jobs can actually be taken up by AI. And when that happens, we probably get into an era where we have a kind of people who he describes as the useless class and talks of them as people who are not even there to be exploited, but they are just not needed. This brings a lot of ethical issues and other things. Prof, you've read the book. How accurate do you think the future of work that Harari paints for us is? How accurate do you think this picture is?
Thank you, moderator. Perhaps I will request that we step back a little bit because a number of people may not have read the book. So, briefly, the book is in 21 chapters, but he summarizes it, or he talks about them in 5 blocks. So what he talks about the 5 areas. The first is the challenge, and that is where the challenge of work and development is. The second is the potential responses. So then we will respond. And then the third is the technological challenge. Within that, and the political atmosphere within which some of these technological challenges will be addressed. And then what I found interesting about what he calls the post-truth. And then the global development and so on. And finally, life in the present era. And so life in the present era on all this. So my take on your preamble is the fact that this is not new. The change over centuries, long history, is one of people trying to accommodate change and technology. So the change from Stone Age to Iron Age created the same issue. And one of the most recent ones was in UK, when they were changing from typesetting of newspapers to computer operated. The unions want to break the computers that were being installed, that they will lose their jobs. And so they had to move away from where they were setting up the new computer system into a derelict area which they developed in London. And so the whole idea that change will bring these things would then create that atmosphere for some people to be jittery. And that's where he talks about what will happen this year. The useless class, see, it's also an old issue. When you look at George Orwell's 1984, which he wrote in 1948, the Orwellian issue, and if you go even back to Plato's Republic, or software is here, he talks about the philosophy king and then the various categories. So philosophers like him draw attention to what happens when we have changes. Some may be able to be accommodated, and some to be accommodating and look at the issues, and some may also fall by the wayside. But what invariably happens is that people respond. And so there is also the lateral change rather than the vertical change. The lateral change is that somebody in one profession would then transfer the knowledge into another area. And so when we come to his potential responses, we will do. But the whole idea about having a group that we think will be made redundant comes with every change in technology and with every age historically.
Thank you very much, Prof. But one of the arguments he makes with this particular change is that, and he contrasted with the industrial change and other things, that people could easily retrain, like you're talking about if you are a farmer and some farm machines come and other things, you can retrain into something else. But it appears that the AI revolution and the kind of change that we are faced with and the pace of that change, not so many people can actually retrain. That is one of the arguments. So he then points out that this could probably be a different kind of change, different from what we have had. I'll come back to you, but let Dr. Finney have a take at this.
Well, I think he in the book he talks about a number of things, very hard things, and some of them are very, very truthful. But when we look at the world, we have gone through 3 industrial revolutions. The first industrial revolution, and every industrial revolution has a machine, okay? And then it has a fuel. It has its own communication. The first industrial revolution, the machine was a steam engine. The fuel was water. What brought about was what we call MOX. The communication and the transport was a railway line, the railway. Then after 100 years, we moved to the second industrial revolution, and the machine was generator and motors. And then the communications were radios, and later on it came to television. The transport was the highway. Then, after the Second World War, 1954, when the 2 engineers in America brought in the machines of machines, the computer. And because every industry, when we look at all the 3, there is always a machine, and the machine must have a fuel. The computer then has a fuel, which many people even don't realize, which is time, T-I-M-E. What do we use time for? To predict the future. And this is why the first Western world, the first world, are very good at predicting the future. Time is used to predict the future. And this is why, in fact, these days we have abandoned even the clock, the time. If somebody is putting on a watch, it's for decoration. When somebody asks you time, you use your smartphone, which is a computer. And in 1980, we abandoned the time. So this world is called nano world. And in every, as Kofi said, in every industrial revolution, man has risen to its own destiny. And this is what I believe, that certain parts I didn't agree with him, in the sense that he didn't even mention the commons, which later on maybe we can elaborate. So yes, the computer is coming, but by and by there is something in man that makes man rise to that occasion. So I think in 2020, by 2050, which he talks a lot about it, man would have a solution to some of the things that we are going to discuss.
All right. So maybe you can add this to your take and on that. Granted that man always rises to that situation, even though Harari tries to paint a more gloomy picture when it comes to this. Like to probably add to your response, does man really want to work for working's sake? I think most people probably work because it's a means of livelihood. So if a machine is taking your job, why compete? I mean, relax and do what is uniquely human, if there is anything like that. So maybe you can add those angles to your response on that.
Yeah, I would say that the more I read this book, the more confused I became, and then I asked so many questions. Talking about AI and looking at my age now and the way things are going, and I could just imagine that the next 10, 20 years, perhaps machines will be in the lecture halls teaching instead of me doing that. Yes, and then students wouldn't be around, and you know, the infrastructure here, what happens to that? Yuval is trying to take us somewhere with his ideas. And I think I would always want to bring it home to our situation. If we have all these, machines, and we buy into them, okay, the question then is, are we really ready to accept these? I hope you get me. Are we really ready to take on these challenges? AI, do we even really want to go there as a people? We may be there already. I've been looking. We are using our phones, some of us. I was having a chat with a doc, and then we were talking about the fact that we have our phones. You said it right, Lee. It's a computer. And yet, we have this GPS system. We have whatever we call it now, the new address system. And still, if you ask someone for direction, instead of saying, oh, my address is CC, whatever, he says, oh, you, when you pick a taxi, say you alight at signs. Are we?
But Ravi, don't you think that is a more localized situation, a more Ghanaian or African kind of situation where people might be even losing their sense of navigation? There are funny stories about Google Maps leading people into ditches and other things. And they, sometimes when they...
Yeah, so the question is that are we prepared? That's where...
As we go along, we probably realize that we also don't get to vote on these things.
Yes.
It's not like your preparedness and other things. If the big corporations and other things think that it is profitable, there's some economic sense in it,
yeah,
they are rolled out, maybe.
Yes.
So you might not. So that is even the risk. The fact that most people might not even be prepared for that. That is even the more the risk.
Yes, that's where I'm coming from. Mm-hmm. You see, so well, I don't know, but perhaps you may want to come in. But as I said, for me, the more I read a book,
yeah. Let me quickly say this. You see, whether we like it or not, we are living in a global village. And these things are catching up. I mean, take books, for example. Books is either going to be abandoned or it's now starting to be abandoned. It's going to be screen. Why? Because books are made up of trees, and trees are very difficult to keep them. You must have a very high air-conditioned room so that moths and other things would not eat them, so that if you're a Methodist or Anglican or maybe Roman Catholic, you go to a church and they have a hymn book, they mention in hymn 2, 3, 4, 5. By the time you open the book, people have started singing because it has been put there on the screen. So whether we like it or not, this is what we call the postmodern era in which we are in. And as a country, look at even the e-commerce. Trillions of trillions passing through the internet. But these monies are going over our head. We are not using them. So whether we like it or not, we are in it and we are better prepared to see as a people and as a government what we want to do with it.
Maybe Prof. Poche, yeah. Yes. So when I read the book, I thought about the post-work era, I asked myself, and where Professor was talking about the fact that, every age has a certain kind of revolution, industrial revolution. And Harari is saying that this age will see machines taking over the work of human beings, and some people are going to be redundant and jobless. Now, what history tells us that during the Industrial Revolution in England, you had people being afraid because machines were going to take over their work. But this kind of work was to be performed with the muscle. So machines were going to take over, not the cognitive one. And so later they realized that machines were not really going to beat them because they still had this. So the Luddites, for example, will go into factories and break down the machines. And then, they found that, we can still operate the machines and tell the machines what to do. This is a supercomputer. The human being is a supercomputer. But now, Yuval is saying that we've entered a period where the machines are going to take over the work that your muscles will do and the work that your brain will do. That is very different. So you have this kind of the conspiracy between information technology or a kind of information technology working in concert with biotechnology, where even some human beings, it's going to change our understanding of what it means to be human. Because some human beings are now going to work with machine parts. Where in some of the movies we watched in the 1990s, we watched Cyborg and Predator, where we were surprised to see machines having human parts. You shoot and there's blood coming out. But within it, you've got titanium and other things. That a human being walking is not a human being. So this is where, and it thinks, it uses algorithms and other things to algorithms. Well, so it will beat you at work. But then I started to think, okay, he was saying we were using we. Who are the we? Who are going to be the redundant? Who are going to be the class that will not have jobs? The machines are going to be made by human beings, a certain class, a certain group of people who, because of their capitalist orientation, will be interested in creating these machines to work for them, thereby getting some people out of work. So those people, we call them men, human beings, they will not be affected by this kind of revolution. They will enjoy. But those who don't produce the machines, they will suffer. I thought about this and I said, okay, let me think like a Marxist. I love Karl Marx. So I started to think of Marx, and I said, Marx tells us that human beings have progressed in different stages. Each stage, or what he calls a point of revolution, occurs because of the means of production, what we basically use to produce. So we move from the communitarian, or the primitive communalism, where we were together and we're using basic tools. We really transferred our scientific ideas into technology, because technology is nothing but the use of scientific knowledge to produce things that will serve you. And we moved from that part and went into the period of slavery, where we started to use other human beings to work for us. Then we moved from that age, and even that there was a change, and people started to be agitated. So they found a way to bring in the feudal era, where serfs, no longer slaves, were used as a technology of production. Then again, agitation came, and then machines came in. These were the machines, the factories that we have. This ushered us into the capitalist era. This is the Luddites now going into break. No, Harari does not say these things. And I found that to be, using the Marxist frame to critique him. That ultimately, maybe we shouldn't be afraid. Because now we've moved from the capitalist period. Marx is saying that we'll go into the socialist period. Well, the Russians experienced it. It's still going on in the Soviet Union. But he now moves beyond the socialist period, or the socialist phase, into the AI phase, where machines again are going to come, thereby creating a class. Marx tells us that history is basically moved by class struggle. So ultimately, you will have the class struggle happening, where those who are out of work will now rise up and fight against, and find a way to fight against the machines, which will then maybe usher us into another period. So Marx, now I'm beginning to theorize, because Marx gets us to the socialist period and the communist period, but he doesn't tell us. He says that that is the end of history. That's where we end. St. Augustine will tell us that we basically get to heaven and history ends. Those who believe in the cyclical theory says it goes on and on and on and on. So using the linear progression, of which Marx is a disciple, he ends using dialectics, the movement. He ends at communism, right? He doesn't even talk about communism. He says socialism, and then some people brought in communism. That's where we end. But now we are in a period where there's going to be a clash again, class struggle. Those who don't have work and the machines that have taken over the work. What happens when these people become awakened and they start to fight against the machines? That's the question that Harari must answer.
Yeah. And probably as we go along, we probably would think of what kind of warfare they probably would wage in this situation. Where
He said that when it gets to that point, now the machines are going to even defend those who created them. So you have cyborgs, and he says you have what? The ones we used to make people having weddings and they used to drones, now fighting for them. So before you plan an attack to go, the drones are already taking you out. But human beings can be smart.
Okay. And that brings my mind to something, and I think I'm beginning to understand this better, because then when we are made redundant, because the machines are working for us, then very soon we realize that we don't have anything doing. I don't need to go to the switch and turn it on, right? But I can clap and the lights will be on. I'm home. I need food. If something happens, I do some, I'm sick, right? Then what happens to me? I'm just useless. You're useless. Good. I feel useless. I feel hopeless. I need to work, but the machines are working for me, right? So I'll have to pick arms and start fighting the machines.
No, it's about your livelihood. It's about you not being free, because the machines are not only working and serving you, the machines are also working, because someone says work. And the one who runs the machine, they constitute a class. They rule you.
So we'll move this forward. I mean, we'll move this forward. Let Reverend come.
Anyway, I was enjoying this discussion, and I was happy that he brought us back to what YUVAL himself is saying in his book. Mm-hmm. What I want to add is the fact that I see YUVAL not losing his identity as an historian. And he is distinguishing two types of history, which I was sharing with him. History as providence and history as progress. And so the interpretation of being useless, being redundant, should be interpreted, in my understanding, along those two lines. You either join the progress train, or you are left behind in such a way that it doesn't matter anymore what you do. Even you're going to resist against the progress wouldn't have any meaning anymore as it did in previous years. In fact, what you would want to be fighting wouldn't even be there for you to fight. And so he talks about a vacuum at a point where those who are not creating these machines, you have more or less no opponent, if you like. It's just that you don't belong in there, you are not necessary for the progress of history. And this, according to my understanding of what YUVAL is saying, is that the type of progress that we are getting now is such that it doesn't allow any competition from any other system and consideration of history. So, history as providence still allows us as human beings to find meaning in work. History as progress, and the type of progress he envisages, will be a kind of progress which no longer gives us meaning, even if we would have to work. We neither have value as workforce. Now we have baptized that. We no longer say manpower, we say human resource, all right? So we no longer have value as human resource, nor do we even have value as market. Because YUVAL is thinking that the system will create its own markets, which eventually would themselves be digitalized. So if you are not part of that creating the system, your existence more or less is peripheral, and it makes no meaning in terms of progression of history. So it is a redundancy of the human person in terms of determining the meaning of history at all, even before we have begun a class struggle.
So let me press. We need to move on. I'll come to you. So let me press this a little bit. I think to pick out from the essence of this is that in the previous revolutions, or in the previous technological jumps and other things, you had still use of certain class, even the lower class that we talk about. You probably wanted to exploit them, and YUVAL paints a picture where talked about is the issue of work itself. If an AI takes over my job,
shouldn't I probably let the AI take that job, and I'll probably relax and do what is more human, what AI cannot do, provided I can get some livelihood. The issue is, will I still get livelihood? So do people work in terms of work? Do people work for working sake, or they need livelihoods? In this case, we can then talk about some of the economic theories as the universal basic income. Is it the time for that now? And places that have been tried probably have not worked well. Can we press that angle a little bit before we move on, Prof?
Well, what is work? And so if you define work in terms of going out to an office or doing something, then you have a challenge. You can stay in your room and work anywhere in the world, depending upon how you get in touch with what is going on. So what YUVAL is talking about is that the system is moving on, and therefore the nature of work is going to change. And whether you think about it or not is going to change. So he makes a point which he repeats quite a number of times in the book is, who are you? Do you know yourself? He begins and ends with that, his last sentence. So if you know who you are, then you also understand what you need to do in order that you will be part of the new workforce that will come about. So yes, historically, there has always been the top and then the bottom, and it's always been bottom heavy. Right, always been bottom heavy. If you look at even history, as he pointed out, at any point in time, one item drives the world. One item. Now the item is fuel. The fuel now is oil. Previously, the item that drove the world was sugar. And that's what led to slave trade. Now, salt before that drove the world. And so what he's talking about is that now the AI is what is going to drive the world. And the fuel that will go with it is our ability to think. And so that is what is going to bring about change. Then he's saying the two issues that are going to drive it are biotechnology and infotechnology. And so if we are thinking about what we want to do, then he is trying to tell us that we need to think differently beyond what we think now. So if you say, oh, we may be left behind, you see, there is an issue of philosophy underlying some of the concept of universalism as opposed to individualism or exclusion or now thinking about your corner. But he is saying that he is talking about the global issue and what is going to operate at the global level. So if you are asking about work, then the issue of work is that work may transform itself in a way that we as human beings will define. Because there were some works that didn't exist. I ask my students, if 20, 30 years ago I said, go and do computing, you ask me, what would I do with it? But now, people are saying that, oh, this is what we need to do. And so every era defines itself and people find things that will go with that era. And so I'm very optimistic about the future insofar as these things are concerned. Because if you know what is happening, then you anticipate and work with it. It is when you are unable to anticipate that you will be left behind. And that is where we as Africans will need to think about.
Excuse me, just to share on this issue of what is work and the Prof's comment about the philosophical implications of some of the things YUVAL says. Now, I'm coming from the perspective of ethics. And so, actually, work has ethical, moral implications. Now, somewhere along the line, YUVAL says and that's why I want to contradict Prof a bit, that all these things, rethinking, creating a new set of jobs and all of that, is possible with AI and the big data and all of that and how it is organized. I heard or I read him saying that eventually what will be left for human beings as work will be the job of care, which has been actually the original meanings of work. Now we turned work upside down and shifted the concept of work from care to creativity, going to the office, going to this, and production. And so eventually, work came to be attached to productivity more than to care. And YUVAL is saying, if there is any planning to do at all, he is envisaging a global community that forces current trends to shift away from contemporary definitions of work back to definitions of work as care. Now notice that regardless of how wealthy a person may be, it just doesn't work for us as human beings to wake up in the morning, dress well, and cross my legs. And so it's a part of being human to find myself doing something, taking care of something, to the extent that we are unable to recreate modalities for human beings to get involved on a global level in care issues. There's no job for us, according to YUVAL. If AI mixed with biological technology will work as he thinks. Now, he exaggerates a bit for the sake of effect, but he thinks that if it will work the way he envisages it, we have no business at all. With all this future planning and so on and everything, it's just a matter of allowing the computers to do their job, and planning is done. Whether we are in Africa or Europe or wherever, there's no job for us.
What kind of care is he talking about? What is this care thing?
So he talks specifically about, care for the aged, care for children in particular. Says we all love to say children are our future, and yet the way things are today, even if you want to care for your child, you must go to work. So you wake up at dawn, you are leaving the house at 4 a.m. and you are coming back at 10 p.m. The child is sleeping. Maybe over the weekend you have the time to throw the child up 2 or 3 times, and that's it. And so he says that we should begin to think of care in the sense of caring for the human, for that which makes us.
I'm afraid we need to push forward this a little bit. Let's jump straight on the tail of that.
Let me lay down certain foundations.
Okay.
You see, historians seem to be pessimists. I read the book and I know that, but scientists don't think that way. You see, where did all these things begin? We realize that our thinking power is not enough. You see, sometimes we may introduce fear by, like, the fiction. You see, we realize that our thinking power and calculating power won't be enough. Biology too will not be able to help us because we would not bring forth children who will be able to compute faster than us. Thirdly, we cannot bring aliens because in the universe there are no aliens, we know. If you look at cosmology, there are no aliens. So man then begins to think, why don't I make a machine to help my computing power? This is what all these things started. Now we have reached a stage where the computing power of machine is becoming bigger and powerful than the mind. Of course, we should know that because even small electrical circuits, electrons moving through conductors, move through with nearer to the speed of light, which is 3 times 10 to the power 8 meters per second. So, but the fact that, and YUVAL talked about it, you see, when you have more and more computing power, you become more and more intelligent. But it doesn't mean that you are conscious. Intelligence means being able to solve problems. Consciousness means being able to feel. Up till now, the computers and the algorithms with all the big data and then deep learning algorithms are not conscious.
Look, they say that they are working on consciousness.
They are working on consciousness.
But let's, we need to, for the sake of time, we can, revisit some of these things.
So, please, so the work, let me conclude. You see, work, these days, in postmodern world, if you realize, companies are emerging. Company A would merge with company B. So if for an individual, you may be working with company A. But when they merge, it becomes company C. You have lost your job. So what is happening is that it is for you to upgrade yourself before you are sacked. So if people are going to upgrade themselves, they will always get jobs to do.
Okay. The issue is the capacity to upgrade. That is why. But I think that will still go on in the corridors over coffee or juice or something like that. Let's tie into the thing of education. Since we've talked about automation, talked about AI and other things, and we had come to the point where the STEM became quite important. That's the science and technology, education, and all that. But YUVAL seems to also predict that that is also going to go out of fashion. And for those of you who even think that coding is the next sexiest thing, he says probably you've missed the train if you're still thinking about coding, because there are other algorithms that can probably code better than any human can do. So even if you're thinking about that, you've missed the train. Does it have implication for our educational system? Is something like philosophy making a comeback? He brings in an illustration of an AI vehicle, for example, where the occupant who probably owns this car programs the AI vehicle that in the event of an accident, probably prioritize my life. What that means is that if there are some pedestrians on the edges of the road, they can actually be knocked off. This is an ethical issue. How do we manage some of these things? Do we need to look at our educational system? Where is our educational system heading towards? What should be the most important things? They've mentioned that probably we should think more about the critical thinking, communication, collaboration, and even the best education is the issue of reinventing yourself and not any of these fancy courses that we do have now. How does the future of education look like? Maybe I'll start from Levi on this one.
Thank you. Yes, so I have always agreed on this tangent that, and I've always emphasized this to our students, and I may be wrong, but critical thinking, and being innovative is the way to go for us, okay? In the sense that I give this example. If I say x plus 4 is equals to 10, right? And I ask the students to find x. Then quickly, they move the 4 over the equal sign and they tell me x is equals to 6, right? Because 10 minus 4 is 6. But if I should ask, or I should give a preamble, Kofi walks x miles from Science to Casford Roundabout. And then he walks additional 4 miles from Casford Roundabout to the East Gate. The total distance Kofi covers is 10 miles. What was his distance from Science Block to the Casford Roundabout? I'm sure there will be a bit of chaos. But because they will not have the time to think critically about the preamble to deduce that formula and then tell me that, okay, now the distance from Science Block to the Casford Roundabout is 6 miles. And that is lacking. That is what is
If
lacking.
I may cut in now.
Okay.
Yuval says that even if you figure out how to calculate those things, it's irrelevant now. Even if you can figure this out, because you don't have to do it as a human. If you
Because
continue the scenario, so in terms of even work, going back to the things of work, it gets to a point where algorithms will probably be taking the decisions for the finance minister, for example. Look at all the variables, look at all the indices and other things. And if that is what you're going to do, then it's probably going to do a better job in terms of that brute calculation. The AI is going to do a better job. So it's probably not in those areas. That is one of the main teasers of the
book. So then my understanding from what you are telling, or you are bringing up now, is that then algorithms should be the way forward for us to go.
We need to make a decision as a people and all that.
But my question still is, the more I think about the content, my question still is, are we really ready?
He doesn't care if you're ready. The system doesn't care. In fact, it probably will be happier if you're not ready. Which parts of the movies you like, which parts of other things. So it gets to a point that these decisions and other things, they are making them for you. In most instances, they are probably making your life easier.
Yeah.
You subscribe, you give it more data, but can you really trust these big firms, these big organizations, to let them have so much data on you?
To go a step back for a moment, my concern now is that if care is not taken and we want to move along with what Yuval is saying so quickly, we may have a very weak foundation, in educating ourselves.
That's all part of the plot. If you have a weak foundation, you don't have a say. You don't have to manage. You are rendered useless. We come back to that term.
Well,
because you have a weak foundation.
Yeah. Well.
You have some thoughts on that. Well, education and other things.
Yes. Yeah. So when I read Yuval, I also realized that he was coming from a certain perspective. He mentioned education as if education is universal. Education is locale specific. The concept of education is locale specific. Indigenous understanding of education is not the same that you find, in Europe. On the age of enlightenment, the idea of education was quite different from, and still different from many indigenous groups. What they conceive as education. What you see, I thought he wanted to talk about was schooling. He's talking about schooling, and schooling is not education. So even when you take that one out, is education, for example, indigenous knowledge systems, the concept of education, is it in danger? So he's universalizing, rather than paying attention to cultural relativism and, we are different. People are unique. So in there, let's go to the classroom. He said that in the classroom, what he calls education, we should pay attention to how we teach. For example, today, some years ago, it was very arduous and difficult to get information. You had to go to the library, sit for days, trying to get just a piece of information. But now, and also you go to the classroom and you sit right in front of the teacher, the professor, waiting for him to feed you. But now you don't really need those things because, you have this abundance of water, the fool is thirsty, as Bob Marley said. So you have a lot of tools to use. You Google, you get it. So what kind of schooling do we need now? How do we still keep our humanity? Because his fear is that, he said there's a conspiracy between these machines and human machines, and they are going to challenge our humanity, how we feel, how we maintain our relationships. This is his fear. So what then do you need? Yes, let them take the jobs. But in school, you are trying to still get people to protect their humanity. In such a situation, he says that we should pay attention to critical thinking. And he said, well, it is something that European school systems are doing. In Europe, they are still teaching them. So it's not something new. So I thought that he was in a way insinuating that maybe other parts of the world, you don't have that thing going on. And we don't really teach that way. But then he went ahead to say that we must pay attention to that. And as we do that, on that trajectory, we should focus on communication. You made mention of that. How to get people to be good communicators and communicate, how to work together, collaboration. Maybe even that will help us to collaborate, those who become redundant, to collaborate, to fight against the tyranny of AI and stuff like that. And also he talked about another C, but he made four C's. And the last one, creativity. Creativity. Now, where does creativity come from? It's just like consciousness. Even if you want to build a machine, as he said, machines don't have consciousness. Now, our creative energy is it's intense and big. So this is perhaps what we all need when we are faced with the machines and say, okay, creativity, how do I, for example, creatively outwit this machine? He doesn't talk about that, but I think that his emphasis on creativity for me is to get us in a way to protect, one of the ways that we can protect our humanity. So.
Do you have a thought on how the education should go? I mean, in our context,
not schooling.
Education, not schooling.
Not schooling.
And I like that distinction, actually.
That's a bit difficult because I didn't really always want to appear arrogant and try to think I know everything, but which I don't know. So I'll think about that. Just give me 5 minutes.
Sure.
Taking care that that story itself does not become self-defeatist. And so he would say, even in that regard, churches are weak when you compare them to what science can achieve. And churches need to be conscious of that. I think if you'd ask me, one of the things that YUVAL is prompting is that we should be careful as to how we distinguish between the mind and the spiritual. You know, a strong merging of the spiritual and the intellectual, so as to be able to create a story. Of course, no doubt about it, I see YUVAL living out religion as we know it in the equation, and that is, he says, we should make our comments at the tail end of the discussion. So that's yeah. So again, as we said, YUVAL is tracing historical progressions in if you like, in human history. And he says that initially, everything was a metaphysical explanation. Everything was per God. So that the providential approach to life and the meaning in life and achievement and so on. So in the past, it was the priests who gave birth and death certificates. The priests talked about diseases and their symptoms and cure, blah, 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 and so on. And then came the great period of the Enlightenment, where science said, forget it, all these things are myths. They don't solve one single problem. We are coming up with a panacea. Science is coming up with a panacea for all human problems. And so this would be the period of enlightenment, scientific revolution, and science, if you like, philosophy, which used to be the daughter of theology, will now become the master of theology. Theology had meaning, had usefulness to the extent to which it could be harvested for pragmatic problems. At this time, God departed. So you will have all this literature, Nietzsche and so on and so forth. Morality must be autonomous instead of theonomous. Democratization of values. So I determine and decide what is right and what is wrong. Subjectivism, relativism, blah, 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 and so on. God, as it were, not playing any leading role anymore in human history, but the human being taking his or her own fate into his or her own hands. Granted the gift of rationality. So humanism instead of, if you like, providentialism. Now, when things went somehow wrong during the World Wars, the First World War came, the Second World War came, we started reverting slowly to something you may call a moral sensibility. People started looking for things like conscience and so on and so forth. So the whole idea of the human being not necessarily being solely responsible for his or her own development and so on started coming back. And the idea of God will begin to resurface in human history. And so it goes along with what he just said. As that gave way to some form of stability in human history, science will come back, politics will come back, economics will come back, fix the material problems of humanity, and you don't need God. I remember giving a catechism class in Germany to youths between the ages 15 and 17, preparing them for confirmation in my church. And most of them had come because their grandmothers or grandfather or somebody who still believed in institutional religion had promised them, oh, if you would go for confirmation, for your confirmation gift, I give you a motorbike. So they are there and they are sitting there and so on. After every 5 minutes, somebody puts up his hand. They call me Kofi. Kofi, can we go for smoker's break? If you refuse, they stop listening to you. They will do their own thing in the room. So you let them go for smoker's break. And then they came back and I asked the question, do you guys pray? Do you know how to pray? That was my question. There was one of them sitting at the back. He put up his left hand. Said, yes. Said, Kofi, why should I pray? If I need something, I can work for it. In any case, I have everything that I need now. Why should I go and pray? So this attainment of a certain height of materialism, consumerism, gave us a certain sense of security, the ability of the human mind to attain the impossible. Those things that myths used to explain are being laid bare now through algorithms, okay? So then God goes back. Now we are hitting another era where the very challenges of our own creations are staring us in the face. And the likelihood is for people to go back de facto to what they knew, grab it, and look for those stories that can give them some meaning now. Is God back? Now, of course, YUVAL, always fighting on both fronts, will say that in itself is a mistake. And then he points to the various mistakes that religion has made, the atrocities and so on, the mistakes in religious institutions and so on and so forth. So this movement of God in, out, is one of the modes of tracing human history, the progress in human history. For now, I think, is God back is the whole question of an increased sense of agency in the search for what happens next, what comes next, who has the story that tells us how that will look like. And he thinks that that is leading people somehow in one form or another towards this concept of God in a very general, secular sense.
That's probably for another day. But in Yuval's mind and how he talks about his God back, isn't it emanating from a certain misuse, be it global or whatever, or misapplication of God, in the sense that you only need God when you run into that kind of dilemmas that you think you can solve it, like your class, where they don't, everything that they need, they can have it. Then it means that God is only somebody who gives you stuff that you don't need. So that conceptualization of God probably is, but that is probably for another day, not now.
But before let me keep it a little bit in. I think, you see, we have gone to the opposite direction of Germany. With Ghanaians and Africans, it is the other way around. We have made God, and God has become a mentalistic spirit, and he has evaporated. We are also not being responsible as human beings. God, in his Bible, and by the way, Yuval lives the alternative lifestyle. In fact, in his book, he dedicated his book to his husband. Well, maybe I may be wrong, but it's he has a husband. This is what I'm saying. Yeah.
And
YUVAL has a husband. He's a man, but he has a husband. Okay. And I think, let me continue with what I was saying. I think we also have to be very careful. And in this, the church has a responsibility. Because there are so many guidelines in the Bible that can help us. If a man is not going to work, he should not eat. But here we have every Sunday, the whole place in Ghana is quiet. We go to church. And yet when we look back, we are the poorest around. What is happening? I think this is something that we really have to look at it and then move on. And if you're going to look at it, the church would be the leader to help us, not to move to the other way, to the other poles. As Germany has moved this way, we also move to the other way.
I think the moderator can make this a topic, a full topic of discussion.
Exactly, yeah.
For its own on a different day.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can use the mic, please. Which he loves, by the way. You can use your mic, please. Yeah.
Maybe over a bottle of beer by the campfire and talk about this wonderful creation. Or the one that you talk about when you have another human being, tied to a stake and you throwing stones at him. He's basically talking about one that we can approach philosophically to ask the question, where does it all come from? Than the one that we think we know, and he's a lawgiver, and he's up there. And if you are not following him, they will put a tie around your neck and light fire, and we carry bombs and bomb other people because they are not following. Is this the type of God that we want? So he presents the word secularism, for example. What can secularism give to us? I really learned a lot from that part of the book, secularism.
Yeah. So again, as probably this is for another day, because then the issue comes as to the God that is a lawgiver. Then when that comes in, the problem with that is that people become the implementers of, and sometimes they do it very wrongly and other things. And that in itself probably is not a reason to throw everything away. But let's move straight into stories. We have, we've mentioned that along the line. YUVAL brings this picture just stories. Everything is just a story, and distinguish the only thing that to him is not a story is a thing that can suffer or something that have that kind of feeling and suffering. So if I don't want to mention names, but if a bank collapses, the bank as an entity doesn't suffer anything. So it was a story that people bought in, and that story had run its course and is off. You jump onto another story. So is everything a story? I like to Prof, is everything just a story?
The question is, what is your life? Your life is a story. My life is a story. And so he is also talking about the global story, and then points out ways in which some of these global stories have shaped the world.
Let me add this to
The question is, what is truth? So the issue, that's why he talks about stories and talks about myths and talks about events. So we are looking at our stories, but then he pitches his book in world stories. And that is what drives a number of the things that he talks about. But he is also goes to another step as to what will be the stories and the narratives, and which narratives have also shaped or will shape our goings and our coming. So as for stories, like as you pointed out, what is University of Cape Coast? It's a story, right? It's a story of how people have come from a certain angle. And one other question that perhaps one can pose from this is, what do we learn from some of these stories? And then one of the things that you said, we will talk about what we think about them later. But one of the stories that he leaves out is the story of human populations. That he talks about people now moving in and going out. He talks about immigration. But immigration became the valve for which some of the conflicts and the famines that we are experiencing now provided Europe in order to reduce the tensions that existed. And that's why they created, some of them went to the US, to Australia, to New Zealand, to the Southern Americas. This is also a story that he leaves out. But this is a story that will be part of our story now, given how population is now moving and the restrictions on immigration. It's going to be one of the major stories. Why would young people from Ghana go through this whole process of going to Europe, knowing that they may or may not survive? What is their story? And this is one story that, to me, has not been very well told in the book.
You make it sound quite benign. My issue here is, yes, I can accept that they are stories, but are all the stories right? So, for example, he talks about post-truth and disagrees with the term post-truth that is being used recently, and say that we've always lived in a post-truth world. It's always been one story after the other that are probably lies, so to speak. Political story, political parties, ideologies that we talked about, and other things. So the issue is, even if we accept that they are all stories, are there dangerous stories? Are they good stories? How you want to make that?
Yeah, you say that's why dangerous stories from whose perspective? Yes, we can have dangerous stories as the story used by the fascist governments to get people to go through a process and then lead the world into where it went to. So at the back of our minds, we are assessing them post-truth. Right? The post-truth is where, that's how I see, the point I'm making is that there will be various stories, and at any point in time, our assessment of the stories, post-assessment, may say, oh, this is benign, or some of them immediately are unacceptable from a certain perspective. And that's why we are talking about what Trump is doing now. What does he accept as truth? And what he says, oh, this is fake news. Fake news from whose point of view? From his point of view is fake news. But if you look at some of the issues that are coming up, and that's where perhaps my understanding of his stories is that we are all making stories every day. But whose story gets onto the world stage? And whose story gets onto the banner? And whose story is not? So we are all capable of creating our stories. And one of the things that I got from him is, how do we create our own space to tell our stories or to create our stories? So the stories, not that they are benign, but we really need to think about it, because we are living other people's stories in this country. We are living other people's stories. And therefore, as a country, if we are unable to tell our own story, then somebody will tell our story for us. So if we say Africa is not represented in the book, where is our story as Africans? How are we telling our own story? We are not telling our story. And if we are not telling our story, somebody will tell our story for us. So he tells the story without our story. That is, I'm using our as Africans in our story. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I think so.
He talks about it. He talks about his own country, Israel, how stories have come about. And I, as a Christian, love this, looking at it from this story thing. In Cape Cozier, we believe in a story. We say, akotodo Yoruba ogu utano edasa wanye apim kunya apim. There is no way that 30 people can face 1,000. I mean, in those, except maybe they have advanced and advanced and advanced to now, and they were using special drones. Mm-hmm. But that is a story. It galvanizes, the story will galvanize Cape Coast people to make them see that they are great. They fought with 1,000 people and they demoralized, they demolished them. It's a story.
But a false one, you think?
Please, I'm coming. You see, I think the mistake that we make is that we talk about truth, and maybe yourself would, as a philosopher, would, what is truth? You see, it's very, very, very crucial. And now in postmodernism, people are targeting Christians and saying that Christians are intellectual terrorists. They are not prepared to hear any other story, and they want to push their story on other people. But having our own stories and being prepared to listen to other stories, I think would make the world a bit safer than we saying, no, this is our story. 500 years ago, there was this, there was caliphate, there was that. We want to bring it back. This is where the problem.
There are a lot of angles in this, but we need to end here. So I promise that we will talk about our take-home, when we evaluate the book entirely, what our thoughts are. I know there are some of the things we wanted to talk about that we can't because of time and how the discussion went. So with this, I think I'll start from Osofo and reverse the order as the first time. So overall.
Well, I will say, as a person of institutionalized religion, I felt very challenged. Not that I'm hearing some of these things for the first time, but in the way YUVAL packages his thoughts. While indicating clearly his own, if you like, position regarding religion, he still manages to present religion in such ways that you have the feeling, I need to think again about what I'm doing. And that is where Prof's issue, why I said we have to revisit that again, is important. Because we have these two extremes, where either religion is nothing at all or religion is everything. And I think it's one area, if I would have a personal dialogue with YUVAL, that's the area where I will go. What exactly, and now to be clear, I'm talking about institutional religion, faith. Where exactly does that play a role in human history? I seem to hear YUVAL say, history will be what human beings make of it. This equation leaves out completely belief in cooperation between a given object of faith and what human beings can do. What do I achieve in this equation? Where is the role of that in which a majority of people have believed and cling to it? How do we fill the vacuum when they drop that baggage of religion? Thank you.
Very deep. I was impressed with the plot, so to speak, it how one topic, was made to, how the topics, were linked together. Before he will end one chapter, he will give you a kind of key that this is what I'm going to talk about, and it has something to do with what I have to, even though they may look not linked in any way. I really liked it. And I also liked his, that bold position he took and his ability to criticize himself as an Israeli. His own people, how he criticized them. And the doctor here wanted to know if he was a bit biased or he was speaking from that Jewish perspective. He really criticized his people to the point that he said, my people think they developed everything, including yoga. and our God is the best. And if you are not Jewish, you are lost. That is a lie. He went on to say that is a lie, and he said that they even claim that some of the yoga positions, basically can be found in the Hebrew alphabets. And Abraham was the father of yoga, and one of his sons went to Israel, to India, and developed it there. So I really liked his ability to critique his own people and criticize himself. But one thing that in all this I find is centering the human being and asking the human being to know him or herself better by mastering the mind. And I think it takes us back to the one of the greatest commandments that the sages have given to us, which is man, woman, know thyself. Just mastering the mind. And he ends, no, even before Socrates, the ancient Egyptians had said it. So, but he said that at the end of the day, know your mind, control it before the algorithms take over.
Thank you. Yes, I would say that Yuval's book taught me a lot. Yeah, I read to acquire knowledge, and I think he did just that for me. And I like the way he writes, simple language. He uses a lot of examples, practical examples, and I like that about the book. One thing he wrote about, that's terrorism. And I really enjoyed that part a lot. For the first time, I think, in many years, I've read a book and used pencil throughout, almost underlining things and, trying to make meanings. Things are getting my attention, and because I don't... wants a shot in your book. Yeah, so I really do that. I don't like doing that because I believe if I should give you the book, I don't want to give you the pointers, But for the first time I've done that, I'd like to read this. I made a note here actually about terrorism. When he ended it all, he said, hence terrorists resemble a fly that tries to destroy a china shop. Yeah. The fly is so weak that it cannot move even a single teacup. So how does a fly destroy a china shop? It finds a bull, gets inside its ear, and starts buzzing. The bull goes wild with fear and anger and destroys the china shop. That is what happened after 9/11, as Islamic fundamentalists incited the American bull to destroy the Middle Eastern china shop. Now they flourish in the wreckage, and there's no shortage of short-tempered bulls in the world. So I underlined all these paragraphs, and I wrote good analogy.
Thank you.
Well, I read YUVAL, and some of the things that he was saying was not new to me because I've read Jeremy Rifkin's, I've read Ray Kurzweil, Singularities, and other things. But what really touched me, I'm an elder in UIC, and when I'm reading a book, I begin to find out, in fact, I began to frighten, what are they saying about Jesus Christ? What are they saying about this? But what really gave me hope were two things: consciousness and meditation. YUVAL is not too kind about about religion, but he meditates. So that gave me hope. Oh, this man talks about meditation, fine. Then consciousness. It also gave me hope that AI may come, maybe at my living. I'm not saying that AI hasn't come, but I'm talking about consciousness, AI bringing consciousness. And it gave me some hope in my goal that I said, that at least the machines that we are making, we are getting AI doctors, AI drivers, AI bankers, AI lawyers, but AI is not conscious. And yes, at least. So it gave me hope, meditation, and consciousness.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. In fact, I was impressed with the range of issues that he raised in the book, from the beginning to the end, such that it always caught your attention and you were willing to go along reading it. And so he has a way of condensing world history over a period into stages, which then leads to his presentation. And I really like his style, as he said, his style of writing and the things that he brought up. And for me, he talked about 21 lessons. But then I also had my own lessons. And my first lesson was telling us to tone down the prophet of doom approach to things. Right? We need now to be reflective and tone down the prophet of doom approach to issues and things. Then the second lesson I learned from it was how he discussed the concept of happiness and how, people now begin to think about things. He gives one example that when things improve, people then begin to demand more and become agitated. And so you take it like this. When the 4-lane road highway to Accra was done, people were saying, hooray, now everybody is buying a car. We all get choked and we get angry that we need bigger roads. And really, drawing my attention to the fact that as we improve things, we begin to demand more. So as a society, what do we do? How do we begin to think about how people react to events? And finally, he made a statement, which I wrote down. He said, philosophers are very patient people. Engineers are less patient. But inventors are the least patient of all. And that, the investors would always want to invest and make change, get their returns. And therefore, once we don't understand, we think that they are hurrying us. Perhaps, where are we? Are we the philosophers with patience? Or we are engineers who are somewhere in between the philosophers and the inventors who are pushing us? And as I said, I really learned a lot, and I think that I must go back to think about my own story in terms of the stories that he talks about. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Let's give a round of applause for ourselves. I think it's been a rough start for us with the power situation and all that, but we've managed to go through. And the discussion actually goes on. This is not exhaustive. And again, I don't think any book worth the salt, you can do an exhaustive review of it in a night. So we've raised the issues, we've said the discussions are going. We hope that it will still be going on in the corridors, people talking about it and all that. And the culture of trying to review books and have some of these intellectual discussions will also continue. So thank you very much for your attendance. Again, we don't have a store that shelves this book here, but we have somebody in Accra. That's how I got your copy. So if you are really interested, you can just leave your name, name and other things. I can facilitate that. But again, we don't want this to look like a book promotion, something. We just think the book is worth reviewing and reviewing. So if you want to really get it, we can do that. Maybe I can also promote Audibles a little bit, but not until I talk with them and see whether they would want to sponsor this. Audibles, that's those who like audiobooks. You can actually listen to a range of all these books there when you sign up and other things. In fact, that's how I listened to mine and some other books. So we can facilitate that. The short answer is we can facilitate that for you to get it. So in due course, as we evaluate what has happened and how we can make it better, in due course we will come up with another interesting book, and then we will announce it and just review it with probably definitely a different set of discussants and all that. And so I think that will be it. Thank you very much again for coming. I think you have a mic, you can say it. Or it's for my ears only.
Oh, yeah. So this whole concept is more or less an offshoot of a concept that we have. We have a readers club actually. So we invite you to join us if you are interested, because we want to keep that going. Because we don't have anything of that sort in the system. So if you want to join us, just leave your name and then other details will contact you. Yeah, thank you.
So thank you very much once again and have a good night. You can pass through the coffee shop, get a cup of, it's evening, get a cup of juice or something and go.